My name is James Portnow. I've been a game designer for about 15 years. Many of you have heard me do the spiel already, but I have worked on games from League of Legends to Call of Duty to things like Farmville. And I write a show called Extra Credits and Extra History. All right. Oh, yes. All right. Thank you, tech crew. Sound important. I think we're going to go over this later today. So when I was thinking about this, I originally thought about coming down and giving you guys a talk on the sort of technical elements of being a game designer or about how to get into the industry, because I know that's probably on a lot of your minds. And don't worry, I'm going to leave a lot of time for Q&A. Feel free to ask those questions or anything you want. It doesn't have to be about this, because today I thought about it a lot, and I realized that with the chaos in the world and the way the industry is going right now, I need to talk about something a little bit more. I need to talk about the magic of games, why these things matter to us, right? Because as I thought about it a great deal, I realized that you guys have an opportunity that my generation sort of failed on, right? You guys have an opportunity to do things right. With Unity, with turnkey APIs, with all the asset libraries out there, a couple of you in the basement can make a game seen by millions of people. And that can change the world. And I know this isn't going to be the talk for all of you, but I'm hoping that if I can reach one of you, right, flying out 1,000 miles on a month that's insanely busy is going to be worth it. So please bear with me on this one. Because I have talked with presidents and prime ministers. I've talked with heads of international scientific organizations. I have written briefs from Microsoft and Google about games. And there's a reason that they all care about games. There's a power in games. And we see it evident even here, right? If we look around this room, if you think about, well, why am I taking an hour out of my Saturday to listen to this guy talk about games, right? That's a powerful thing. We're here because for each and every one of us, games have meant something. They've impacted our lives. They've changed who we are. And that's a powerful thing. And that's what I want to talk to you all about today. There is a reason that we are the fastest growing mass media in the history of humanity. In 40 years, games have eclipsed the box office. They outsell books and film and theater, right? And when we think about that, we have to realize that we have every year, people spend more time playing Candy Crush on their phones than it would take to build every major monument in the world. This means we have to realize that this can't just be a pastime. It can't just be a way to kill the hours between work and sleep. And so as I went and started thinking about how to talk to you guys about the magic of games, about what it means to either be a player in the future or, maybe enter the industry or write about these things intellectually, being part of the media, I realized that, to be honest, I had a really hard time writing this talk. I probably rewritten this talk like a dozen times. I started trying to deconstruct it logically, and I just couldn't do it. I tried to write it like I write an Extra Credits episode, and it wasn't there. So I'm going to do this the only way I know how to do it, which is to talk to you guys at first about my experience and why I'm here in this room, right? Because I've dedicated my life to games. I think there's probably a number of you in this room who would like to dedicate yours to it too. And why would we take this one walk we have through life and put it towards something that people often call trivial? Because it's not. But to do that, I had to think back. I had to ask myself, why am I here, right? Why did I come to Georgia on this weekend to have this conversation with you guys? And I realized the only way I could do it is to go back, because my earliest memory is a memory of a game. when I was very young, right, I was like 5 years old, and my first memory is traveling south through Seattle, the town I grew up in. Great town for games, right? You got Nintendo, you got ArenaNet, you got Valve, you got all these things, but I didn't know any of that at the time, right? I was 5 years old. And so we pull into the parking lot of this stadium that doesn't even exist anymore. And I'm 5, I'm super excited. I have no idea what we're doing, but I'm excited about it. And we walk up, and I remember these 2 sliding glass doors, and they open up, and we're hit by this cacophony of MIDI. And the reason is, it was the Nintendo of America's World's Fair. It was the first one they had ever done. And my mother had bought me a Nintendo for Christmas. She knew I liked these things, read about this World's Fair in the paper, thought it would be a lark, a good way to spend the day. And so we're going, and here I am, and I'm running from station to station to station, and my mom keeps going, hey, do you want to try this one? And I keep going, no, I got to see them all. But then as I get close to the back, I see this banner, and there's this banner with a sword and an axe crossed behind a crystal ball with a city in the center of it. And something in that image spoke to my 5-year-old self, right? And I was like, this one, I got to play this one. I don't know why to this day. And we were terrible at conventions at the time, right? You just set up 2 consoles, let people play as long as they wanted. But finally, after an hour, I get my hands on that great piece of plastic, and man, it's like nothing I've ever seen. And I'm so excited. And it takes me 45 minutes to beat Garland. Anybody who's played this game, that probably takes you 10 minutes now, but who knows if I knew how to equip weapons even. I was 5. But finally, I beat this first boss, and I'm really excited because I played video games before. I know what you do in video games. You rescue princesses. And I'd rescue the princess, so I'd beaten the game. So I was really excited to see how this game ends. And I walked back to the first castle. And I walk up to the king, and the king goes, thank you for rescuing our princess. We'll fix this bridge for you. I'm like, that's a weird way to end a game. But all right, I'll play along. And I step onto that bridge. And you know what happens? This. And this screen may not look like much today, but at the time, this was beautiful. And this music swells, and the story shows up, and it tells you about this adventure you're going to go on. And that was so exciting. But it's actually not this. It's not this moment that brings me here. It was the next one. Because after this, after you step on that bridge, a world opens up in front of you. And think about what that means to someone who's 5 years old, whose only places to go unsupervised are the backyard and a couple of rooms, right? And all of a sudden, there's this world in front of me, a place for just me. And we all need that at times. I think we've all had moments where life is too heavy, where you feel stuck in your job or your major. And having this other place that you can enter and just explore is a powerful thing. Games, right? Since then, I've stepped on 1,000 worlds and seen 10,000 sunrises. I have lived history and walked on the streets of ancient cities. I've seen things I couldn't imagine and experienced things I couldn't even dream of. And sometimes I've just sat back and enjoyed the view, right? And this is powerful. This is a powerful piece of the magic of games. But I realized in that moment that that world for me to experience, that's really what it is. This ability to step into a new place, but not only a new place, but into the shoes of someone else, right? This is the only medium in the history of humanity where you can experience just a little bit of someone else's life. And through doing so, come to sympathy and understanding, compassion and empathy, or even just experience a little bit of that life that you always thought you wanted. That's a powerful, powerful thing. I mean, this medium allows us to walk in the shoes of the greatest people and face their challenges and wrestle with the questions that they've wrestled with, and through doing so, come to understand our world and how we would address these things. And that's profoundly impactful. That's a responsibility we have. But somewhere in chasing this, we have sometimes lost some of the magic that was there in this. sometimes in trying to become more cinematic, more like other media, more like television or film or what have you, we have at times stepped away from that magic of games. And that's what I've really come here to talk to all of you about, because this is less of a talk and more of a plea, right? To ask you to deliver on what my generation of developers never delivered on. To make sure that we're always making sure that those things are there, that there is something for people to take away when they put down the controller or get up off the couch from your games. Because this is the first mass medium in the history of humanity where the audience isn't merely audient, but participatory. You don't just sit back when playing a game and listen to an author or a director, or heck, me, tell you our thoughts, right? You experience things for yourself. You make your own decisions. You wrestle with your own choices. And through doing so, come to better understand who you are. That is the profound power of our medium. This is the first place where, as a designer, I don't finish the work, right? When I create a game, the art isn't finished until you play it, right? What you do, it is a participatory art. And through doing all these things, right? Through making your own choices and facing your own decisions, that can help you understand the world that you're coming into. And more than that, though, this is the first medium in the history of humanity where you can ask yourself the question, what did I do? Not what did that actor do, not what did that character do, but what did I do? And that is a powerful thing. And I'm not talking about, moral choice moments. I'm not talking about dialogue options. I'm not talking about the good bad meter. I'm talking about any of those moments where you have sat down the controller and just looked at the thing in front of you and asked, what have I done? And it doesn't matter, right? It can be about the remote horror of modern war. It can be that simple question of what it means to raise a weapon to your shoulder and point it at another human being. But it can go a lot further, right? There's no question this medium can't ask us. There is nothing we can't address. It can be a simple thing like, what it means to go from one side of this life to the next, or, about why we choose to share this life with who we choose to share it with. We are not limited to questions of action or violence. This was the major failing of my generation of designers and developers. We saw only those questions of violence and action. And there's so much more to explore out there. And I'm hoping that all of you will take the opportunity that you have right now to address some of the things we've never addressed. Because, it doesn't matter if it's as big as the meaning of life or as simple as realizing, you don't have to give up. These sort of things are incredibly important for us as designers to present to our audiences, to allow them to have the opportunity to explore. But there's one more piece. Many of you probably know that I have spent a long part of my life trying to educate, right? I've taught at the master's and bachelor's level. I always try and teach with the show. I've tried to do this with all of my games. But in all of my attempts to teach, there is one thing that I have found more powerful for teaching than anything else. And that's this, right? How many of you guys recognize this? Just hands. All right, wow, we don't have a ton of Magic players. This seems silly, right? This is a Magic card. It is not in any way an understatement to say that this changed my life. I was playing Magic with a friend one day, and he's taking a long time to take his turn, and this card comes up. And I don't know if you can see what it says at the bottom, but it says, there are some qualities, some incorporate things that have a double life which thus is made, a type of twin entity which springs from matter and light, evinced of solid and shade. And this quote was so much more powerful than any of the hack fantasy and sci-fi I had been reading up to that point. You know what I did? I ran out to the library and I got this book. And then I got every book they quoted in this game. Not because anybody sat me down or said I had a test coming up. Nobody gave me homework on this. I did it because it was introduced to me in a context I cared about. And that is a powerful thing. And how many of you guys are programming students or are programmers? All right, we got a lot more of those. So you guys probably recognize this, right? This is the stack. This is how memory management works in a computer. It's also exactly how the stack works in Magic the Gathering. The first time I saw this, I was like, I understand, right? The game had taught me how to do something that I use every day today without ever opening a textbook. And what was important about it is they did it in a way that didn't involve making the game worse, right? They weren't trying to shoehorn something in, but they rather took something from the real world and used it to make the game better, and in doing so, left me with something for a lifetime. And with those quotes, if you think about it, right, I chose the college I chose to go to because I wanted to discuss those books with people, right? I have a major in classics. And it's all because some designer, rather than to making throwaway silly lines by goblins, decided that they were going to go out and put out actual quotes from real books on those cards, right? They took an hour out of their day after work, probably a lot of the times, to say, I'm going to do a little bit better. I'm going to leave you with something a little bit more. And that's what we have the responsibility to do as we engage millions and millions of people. Because today, there is a crisis of education in the United States. Many of you know this. Many of you are experiencing it right now and, in fact, going through it in your lives. Because the system that we have in the United States for educating, especially the public education system, is a system that we brought over from Prussia in the last, I guess it's 2 centuries ago now, in the 1900s. And this system that we brought over was fantastic for bringing an agrarian society into the industrial age, but not for bringing an industrial society into the information age. It was literally meant to be taught by drill sergeants. It was your retirement package if you were in the army, but it was literally meant to drill in the information that you needed to be a useful person in your daily jobs at a time where you didn't have a cell phone, where you didn't have access to more information than in all the libraries of the 19th century at your fingertips, at the palms of your hands. Today things have changed, and we need to change education with it. And games can help with that immensely. There was a study done of colleges and companies across the world. And they asked, okay, what do we need to be an effective person in the 21st century? And you know what? They didn't say business development or even software engineering, right? What they said was lateral thinking, logical reasoning, teamwork, and communication. I can't think of 4 things we practice more regularly through games. And there's nothing that can't be taught through games, right? I have seen people learn high-level math to put together their World of Warcraft builds. I've actually sat in on a class in Berkeley where they were teaching economics through StarCraft. I've seen people lean in and get excited about history because of civilization. And I've even seen the dullest of subjects, city planning, made interesting by what we do. And, you know, I said I didn't really care about rote memorization. I'm not a big one for the whole drill sergeant approach, but let's say you are. Let's say there are things we want you to memorize. Well, how many of you guys play Pokemon? Just show of hands. How many of you think you can name 5 Pokemon? Just keep hands up if you think you can name 5, 10, 20, 40, 100? All right, great. We don't have to go any further, but you see what I mean, right? Think about how much raw data that is. Think about how much you memorized because you wanted to. Not because anybody ever said, you're going to get an F if you don't memorize this. Nobody ever said, you have to go home and do a paper on this. You did it because you wanted to, entirely voluntarily. Imagine if those were words in a foreign language, right? Imagine how much it is that we have stored in our minds because someone has engaged our curiosity. And that's what we can do through games. That's what we can return to people. Not in any way by making our games worse, but by rather using the very foundational element of games as an interactive media to draw that curiosity out of us. And there's so much I've learned through games, and I think everybody here can probably think of at least one thing they've learned through playing games. But it goes even further. This story is a little bit difficult, but I was teaching at a low-income school. I was teaching at this school while I was out in California. I wasn't really teaching. I was helping out. And it was the type of school where, you didn't go to college, where pregnancy just happened, where there's a day where this kid comes up to me and goes, hey, I couldn't do my homework because I was hiding in the bathtub with my family because people were shooting outside. And it was tragic, right? Like, it broke my heart. But there I was, and I was playing Super Mario Brothers with them. And I was going to teach them about the scientific method. That was my big plan. But then this kid, he runs and he jumps, and he falls in a pit. And he runs and he jumps, and he falls in a pit. And he runs and he jumps. He does something slightly different, and he gets to the other side. And it didn't kick the door wide open, but it opened up just this little crack because we started talking about agency. We started talking about how his decisions matter, how he could affect his life, right? Because in the compressed time that this game offered him, he could see that when he did something, he had an effect on the future. He had an effect on his outcomes. And so why wasn't that true for the life he was leading? And it kind of occurred to him that, it was. He didn't just have to think about the moment that he was in, that he could possibly change his own future. And that seems like a simple thing, right? But so many people, there have been studies and studies done on this, so many people today in this modern, complicated world we live in don't really believe that they can impact their future, don't feel like they have any control over their own lives, feel very trapped. There is a lot of cases also where we've studied this where if you don't believe that you can in fact affect your future, you are less happy, right? You are not going to have the future you want because you don't feel like you can do these things. And yet in games, we give you unlimited agency, right? We teach you every day through playing games that yes, your decisions matter, that the path may be difficult, right? But that kid going to college might have been incredibly challenging for a number of reasons, but there is a path there, right? And sometimes, all the things that are the most worthwhile sometimes have the hardest paths, but they're there, and we can have that impact. We can at least try. And that's something that we can give people through games. That's something that no other medium can deliver to you. You read a book, and it can teach you about agency, but it can't actually give you agency. And that's a profound thing. But all the time, I'm told, hey, James, this is insane. If you want to leave people with something when they get up off the couch, when you want to give something to people to take away, turn off the machine, well, that's going to impact the bottom line. And, oh, man, we can't do that. Like, we're a business. Well, you know what I think is insane? Doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results, right? We are not doing the business of games very well right now. In fact, over the last couple of years, growth has fallen off a cliff. We have seen that we hit record numbers of layoffs every single year for the last couple of years. In fact, we have managed to set a record for biggest entertainment failure of all time several times a year for the last couple of years. Concord, $500 million. Think about when a movie flops and people are like, oh my God, let's talk about how this movie lost $50 million. It's 1/10 of what Concord lost. So we've got to do something different, right? Because the audience has changed. You guys are not the audience of 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You guys have grown and learned and are better than we were as an audience at the time. Saying your mom's gonna hate it isn't gonna move copies. Doing the most puerile attempts to shock us, well, you can't shock a generation that grew up on the internet. Like, really? You can't sell games through our puerile marketing methods any longer. Even these guys now just try and sell you games by advertising a different fake game. But we have to think about the fact that in a world where a game that looks like this can be a literal billion times more profitable than a game that looks like this, that things have changed. Audiences don't just accept the same thing, the same experience over and over and over again. We have come to realize as an industry that our live services games are a risk. We're grasping in the dark a little bit. And that's why I've come here to you guys, because there's an opportunity right now. There's an opening for a new experience, for a different experience. People are looking for something. And that's where I hope all of you come in, right? I think our audience has grown. I remember when I was first making games, I was literally told several times in staff meetings that the only people who play games are boys 10 to 21, right? That's obviously, from looking around this room, not the audience anymore. So there's this opportunity for me to pass the buck, to beg you guys to do better than we did. And that's what I've come here to do today, to just ask you to remember that magic of games. As you're creating games, as you're playing games, as you're reviewing games, just always demand that magic. Don't settle for something that is just a way to kill your time. And when you're creating, focus on what is that little bit. Because when I talk about games, right, I've looked at how many hundreds of billions of hours people have spent on Call of Duty. Imagine if we can move 1% of the amount of time that humanity spends on games to still spending on games, but getting something back, learning something, understanding themselves better, understanding each other better, right? That is a profound thing. So with that plea, I am just going to move on to your thoughts and questions. Don't feel like you have to ask about this. If anybody's want to ask about, YouTube or how to get into the industry, that is totally an option as well. So yeah, any thoughts or questions? And if we want to just form a queue here, that'd be awesome.
Hi.
Hello, sir. We are mighty close here.
Yes, we are. Could it be any closer?
Oh, all right.
So hilariously, I had a question. Earlier that you answered through this entire talk. So now it's just a comment that I think it was really interesting that I wanted to ask before what your thoughts were on older games versus newer games and if they lost that magic. So you've clearly answered that, so I have a new question. Do you think that with the direction that the gaming industry as a whole is going in its downward cliff, do you think that leaves an opportunity for a renaissance of indie developers coming to these things?
So, great question. Basically, to me, there's a couple things. First, I don't want to say older games were better. That is not actually what I'm saying. I'm just saying that there was a time where we didn't know this was big business, right? That said, there are plenty of amazing experiences today, and I think we saw that indie period about 8-9 years ago where you had things like the Stanley Parable, the Witness, all these sort of things that grew out of the last time we were searching for what to do. And so I really think that's there. The biggest issue for indie games right now is discoverability. The odds are stacked against you. The way that search engines work in the App Store, even for Google, for Steam even, although Steam's a little bit better, is that they focus and target audiences at the places that are going to make the platform holders the most money. And so, they're going to advertise at you Call of Duty over tiny indie game that may be harder to get into. So you have to form your own communities. You have to make sure that you're getting out there. Making the game is only 75% of the work, right? But without that other 25%, nobody's ever going to see you. So make sure you're doing that too. But all right.
What are your thoughts on the use of AI for art development in games, both morally but balancing it for the help of business?
It's really tough. So I'm trying to pay artists, right? Like right now, literally, we had this conversation at my company, and I was like, no, we're going to hold out for as long as we can. I do think there is an inevitability to it, right? The cost benefit, we were looking at our game, and I could slash the budget by more than a third if I just AI arted everything. It is a very difficult decision, and especially for an indie developer, I won't say don't make your thing, because sometimes the savings in art is the difference between ever shipping it and not. That said, I think this is where we get back to, hey guys, do it better than we did. AI is a place that we need regulation. AI is a place that we need understanding. AI is a place where, artists should be paid 1/100th of a cent every time the AI pulls from their art to make a thing. And then I'd actually be totally okay with it. I would genuinely be fine. But all that money going back to, Midjourney or ChatGPT or whatever makes it a little rough for me. So on a moral level, until we get a better solution for artists, I do oppose it. On the other hand, I do think that there are great works that we would never see if someone had to pay for $200,000 worth of art to get into their game. I don't fault anybody who's an indie who is doing this. I do fault a little bit if you're EA or Activision doing it. But if you're an indie, I can't say don't do it. I think the hardest thing is to figure out how you do that and still maintain a style or an aesthetic for your game.
Thank you.
I wanted to know, do YouTubers have some impact on the way games are made? Because I'm a YouTuber that kind of speaks about how games are made and the fact that they're kind of in a downward spiral. And I'm wanting people to make better games, but I don't want to be the person speaking to a brick wall, if that makes any sense.
So, YouTube feels like speaking to a brick wall. Let me tell you, as someone who's done it now for 13 years, it always sounds like you are shouting at the void. That said, we do listen to these things, and in aggregate, if a bunch of you are saying the same thing, yes, it will absolutely have an impact and a sales impact. Forming communities around it too, building your Discord community, other things like that, can also help to have a place where a group of people can discuss and actually go, hey, yeah, this game isn't good. Maybe we shouldn't go buy this game. And so don't feel, YouTube can feel like a very frustrating and a very lonely place. Even as those view numbers go up or whatever. You are not alone, you are being heard, and it does have an impact on the industry. It is challenging sometimes, but as your channel continues to grow, obviously that impact will be greater and greater. And once you start having some substantive number of followers, you can also reach out. Like, there's a lot of developers, especially indie developers and stuff, who are willing to talk to you. But you know where you have the greatest impact? Showing your following things that are good. Because it's very easy to say, oh, don't do the bad thing, right? And say, don't play Call of Duty. Well, everybody's going to play Call of Duty anyway. And however many people you have can't probably move that needle too much immediately. But you know what you can do? Say, here's an alternative. Play this thing that somebody in this room made, right? And then all of a sudden, that thing goes from having 2 people who have ever played it to 500 people who have ever played it. And that's huge for them. And that starts moving the needle on some of these like search algorithms and that sort of thing. So I would say, yes, it has an impact, but also make sure that you're promoting things that you think are good and not just saying all the things that we think are wrong right now. Awesome. Good on you for doing it. Oh.
Okay. This is gonna be a mix of comments, and that's gonna conglomerate into one big question.
All right.
But I think part of what's making that disconnect, especially when you talk about lessons without education, is the lack of perspective, seen from both the student side and the teacher side. And also, I'm gonna sidetrack here. I wanna shout out Anthony Obando, high school computer science teacher. He's great at this.
I believe somebody just earned some extra credit.
Please. Okay. But he's very great at at mixing both perspectives. But I think a lot of it is that older people who are more in the game industry now, grew up with a lot more 8-bit games, things like Mario or kind of the older Pokemon stuff. I'm kind of lost, but they grew up with that, and then they didn't necessarily know how far it could go.
Yeah.
But now seeing that this rapid growth has happened over 20, 30 years, and growing up in an age where everything's digitalized, you know that things are going to get better, which I think loses the appreciation that is lost in seeing these larger than life games that an older generation might have had. And I just want to ask, do you think that, how big of an impact do you think that communication barrier is in both like a game making perspective and making a quality game nowadays, and education and teaching without that?
I mean, so on a game making perspective, I do see a lot of people who are my age or older in senior leadership positions, right? And there can be at times, it's easy for a human being to become set in their ways. And I do think that is difficult. And that's where the indie field comes in, right? Because out of nowhere, whatever, a game comes like Fortnite or whatever, and now everybody, well, Fortnite's probably not a good example, but like Roblox, right? Roblox was kind of left field for most people. It wasn't on anybody's radar, and then it wasn't on everybody's radar, right? And I've seen this with a lot of indie games and a lot of stuff that we draw from. The AAA industry does look back at what's being done and what's being successfully done at a level we can't experiment, right? In the AAA industry, when you're paying $500 million to make a game, a lot of the people at the top are going to go, we can only do the thing that we think works every time. We can only make this first-person shooter that's exactly like Call of Duty, because otherwise we can't risk $500 million. And that's the biggest risk of all, right? That's just a recipe for failure, but we do it. You guys have much more opportunity to try the wild thing, to try the new thing. And I think education faces some of the same issues, on top of the fact that because of how my generation of game developers developed games, they were often seen as a pastime, as brain rot, as a way to, as a distraction from work. But you want to know something? Like, I hear teachers all the time today tell me, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, my students are watching these things all the time, spending so much time on them. But we should learn from those things, because if your classroom is less interesting than doom scrolling Instagram, like, we have done it wrong. And so I think we have to get over the mindset in some place in education, although it seems like people here are very open, that games are a distraction from learning rather than a way to empower learning.
Okay.
Thank you. Anytime you have a question, just raise your hand and I will eventually come to you with a mic, because I feel really bad every time you have to hop up here. Okay.
Yeah. So kind of mainly a couple comments, also maybe just some personal questions. But main comments, when you talked about how video games can literally affect your life, I fairly recently experienced that with Cyberpunk, and my experience there is when I posted on Reddit about that experience, it was a fairly widespread experience. The same week that I got into Cyberpunk, I got into it because I had lost a dear friend and I needed a bit of an escape. And apparently not just for me, but for tons of Cyberpunk players, just the way Night City works, the people that you interact with, it's cathartic. It makes you feel seen and heard. And this is something that you don't see very often in games, is these dark sides being acknowledged. Another game I did want to talk about that I definitely think still has that magic, Warframe. It's a little older. It's been going on for 12 years. Wow.
So I played Warframe while I was in my master's program. I put a lot of hours into that game, but so yeah, it's been around for a while.
Yeah, I've put just a couple hundred hours into it. But like even today, it still holds up. They're near AAA level, and they're still taking risks like they're the indie game that they used to be. And personally, I feel that is the way that games should be. You should be willing to take this risk because your players might like it. You should be willing to incorporate this unintended bug just because your player base generally really likes it. Like, I remember most recently with the Lavos Prime access, they brought back the helicoptering from... yeah, they did bring back helicoptering with Dual Zoran Prime. But I mainly also wanted to ask your opinion on the magic of Cyberpunk there, too.
So, Cyberpunk is something I very specifically actually can't talk about a lot for reasons that I also can't talk about. But I will talk about it in the loosest of senses. I think that there is... Okay, CD Projekt has always had a dedication to making sure their games are excellent. And to be honest, I generally agree with the statement that when it came out, Cyberpunk was not where it needed to be. And they had the wherewithal and the will to make it great, right? And if you look at The Witcher, you get a lot of those moments. Because rather than thinking of it as this big top-down thing, I think their power is in thinking of their games in vignettes, right? Thinking of their games in individual encapsulated stories and then really thinking about, okay, what does this story mean? Because it's hard to have a singular meaning for, or a singular emotion or whatever for Cyberpunk. You can play for 100 hours easy. But in each of these areas, there's something that you go in and you feel like, I understand that experience, right? I've been there. And when you were talking about cathartic and the darkness of games, right? I think there is something to allow us to acknowledge that side of us and that side of the world that is very helpful and healing, where you go, hey, not everything's okay all the time. And that's really important, right? And where you go, hey, I'm not Superman all the time, which is also important. We have too many games. Like, I keep... COD is always on my mind, right? But like in COD, you are just a super soldier, and when you die, boom, you stand back up, right? And we don't go a lot further than that. But I think there is value in that profound exploration of humanity, because there's a lot that we want to do to empower our players in games. And it's true, you will move copies if you can successfully empower the player, but really what you want to do is engage the player. And empowering the player is one of the cheapest and easiest ways to do that. It's like putting explosions on a screen when you're making a movie, right? But it is by no means the only way. Did any of you guys play like Silent Hill, the Silent Hill series, back when they were okay? Oh, everybody who's old. All right, yes, we got one over in the corner. If anybody is ever interested, they just did a remake of 2. The thing that's really fascinating about Silent Hill is it was made engaging through disempowering the player, right? Its engagement is through horror, through making you afraid. Well, if you're super powerful, Superman's like not afraid of a ton of stuff, right? Somebody pulls a knife on Superman, he goes, whatever. This was a game where they realized that, and they realized to deliver on the horror, they had to show that disempowerment. So you bring up a good point that too many games are power fantasies, and I think Cyberpunk does a really good job of making you feel cool and elite or whatever, but not being a power fantasy.
Right, like making you feel like you worked your way up to that. It lets you start from zero and then become
a legend.
Become legend, become Night City legend.
How much more time we got?
Well, I mean, we got lunch next, so we can keep going. Until then, we got a question from YouTube. I'll jump
Oh,
in
perfect.
on.
I was going to ask if any Twitch had any questions.
Yep. So on YouTube, Hiccup Interactive asks, how do you approach becoming a better teacher as a gamer and designer?
Think about the experience, right? Your classroom is a designed experience, just like any game. So think about the experience of your students. I was sitting in a classroom literally yesterday discussing the fact that the bell, they had this really, really obnoxious bell sound. They have this bell sound that is antagonistic to the students, that tells you, get out, move. It's not a chime. You guys all know. It's not a nice chime to tell you, hey, it's time for the next class. It is aggressive. And that makes for a worse learning environment, right? So think about all the ways that you can design your classroom in the same way that you would design a game. Great question. Let's get the next one here, and then if you got any more from Twitch, from chat, from YouTube, feel free to speak up, and those will be presented.
Hey, so all right, train of thought really goes.
You've been standing there for a very long time, so.
So, as a YouTube content creator, I'm just wondering if you've kind of observed any what with the rise of like short form content and stuff like that, and people will often talk about people's memory span is really declining. I know you were talking about like the failures of your generation and how it's up to us and everyone going forward to kind of fix them. But I see the problem of, because I'm with a generation of, I grew up with games as my babysitter, right?
Sure, yeah, I
And
understand.
my nephew, he's an iPad kid, which is just even more concentrated, right?
From age 2, right, yeah. Totally get it, keep going.
Yeah, I can't believe you know what Skibbity Toilet is.
Dude, I actually, for any of you guys who play collectible card games, in Vietnam, I got knockoff pirated Skibbity Toilet collectible card game. It was amazing. But anyway, continue.
I think that was about, I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that, or if YouTube kind of translates to what you think we could do in games that can kind of offset that maybe.
So this is actually a huge challenge. You're absolutely right. On the one hand, I don't want to say that, you youngins are listening and learning things wrong. Like, this has always been the case, right? Plato talks about how, these newfangled books, people can't memorize a whole epic any longer because they have these books that they write things down in, and those things are bad. And then, Don Quixote is all about the fact that, fantasy novels will drive you insane. So we have this pervasive thing of, whatever the new medium is bad, right? We had it with games in a way that's less so now. On the other hand, I do think that there is a documented, real scientific shortening of attention spans that we have cultivated through not only like things like TikTok, but also through games and other things. We want to give you a dopamine loop that is shorter and shorter and shorter. And because of that, people demand it, and if they don't get it, I've heard so many college professors say, kids can't read a whole book any longer, right? And I don't think that's actually true, but it is difficult. And one of the things that we're doing with entertainment is we're making entertainment so engaging that why would you want to do these boring things? Why do you want to do? So I think the biggest thing that we can do is figure out, how do you bring those forms into education? How do you bring those forms into, because if TikTok was all educational, but like in 10-second content, great, right? I think that through games, we can go the other way. Games have taught me patience, right? Like, how many guys play FromSoft games? Like Dark Souls, Demon's Souls, great. You know those games. Those games are not difficult. They're just a test of patience. And like, we can do this a lot where we can help train people to sit down for longer intervals and focus on something. How we move that to things like books, that's a big question. Once again, I'm going to go, hey, who can solve this? I'm hoping you. But difficult. We have done this thing where we have destroyed our own attention span. I'm worried that we have gotten to a point where we're building technology so fast without considering what it's doing that we don't know how to counteract that, how to counterbalance that. And I think that is one of the numerous challenges that you guys face. But it's a really good question.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yes.
So Urchins and Ink comments that in comments that in Urchins and Ink giving constant feedback. That's what players did Doing something right helps with their deduction and feeling of accomplishment. So how we give the players feedback.
Well, and I think that's great for education, right? Like in education, we have this problem, right? You do a piece of math homework, right? And you hand it to your teacher, and then, oh my God, your teacher is overwhelmed because they've got 50 of these, and they get back to you the next week. And maybe they have a problem circled on it. Nobody actually looks at that, right? You don't remember why you did what you did by that point. Whereas in games, you get feedback like this. I talked about that kid who ran and jumped and fell into the pit. How many seconds between he fell into the pit and when he got to try again, right? And we, as human beings, are trained to learn through failure, right? And the more we can close that loop, the more quickly we can give you feedback, especially in education, the more valuable it is. But yes, person with the awesome attire, come and ask your question.
Oh, I first want to share that I've had a very similar experience to you when you were younger, but with me it was with Breath of the Wild, completing the Great Plateaus quests, and then suddenly you just see the whole of Hyrule, a world of limitless possibilities. It is yours to do what you wish. And this is completely unrelated, but the question I wanted to ask is, how do you get seen in the games industry when you're not some like AAA game studio or something?
So how you get seen, it's actually funny. It's still a lot of just like pounding the ground. There's a lot of festivals and other things that you can submit your games to. Most of them are free to submit to. You should just submit to all of them. If you win or even get into the festivals, they'll usually give you a free ticket to the whole conference where you can talk to people. Media, y'all know everybody needs more content because we just talked about how quickly people consume content. On a slow news day, if you email PC Games N or whatever on a day where they have to put a new piece of content on their feed every 8 minutes, they're like, cool, somebody sent me this thing about a weird indie game, I'll put it up, right? Don't be afraid. Don't think that you don't matter. Don't be afraid to get out there and have those conversations with people. And then another route is, we talked about YouTube. If you know people who are on the YouTube circuit, find some small YouTubers because they really need content. They're going to be happy, excited to chat with you about making your game and about playing your game with the developer. And then as those start to get seen, you can go to a little bit bigger YouTubers and so on. Same with Twitch. It's a lot of your time. It's a lot of effort. It's the part of the job that I don't actually like. I just want to be making my game, but it is the other part that you have to do. But don't think for a minute. Somebody has to succeed. It might as well be you, and people will listen, right? You have an interesting enough idea. People will listen simply because it's good for them. They need to make content. I hope that was helpful in some way.
It was.
All right, awesome. Hello.
Hello! First off, I am a huge Final Fantasy fan, so just seeing that Final Fantasy was that game for you is awesome.
Yeah.
But my question is, so gaming is a very social experience
Yeah.
for everybody. It's a community. It brings people together, regardless of whether you play solo games or you play multiplayer. And as we're approaching this kind of digital dark age where video games are kind of falling off and people are losing confidence in AAA studios and just in video games in general, where does that connection lie in the future?
So I always talk about Discord, right? And the communities that we can form amongst ourselves. Because I do think it is a very profoundly social thing, but there's also a pervasive underlayer of toxicity within the video game community, which we can't just deny, right? For too long we pretended, that's part of the problem for AAA. We pretend it doesn't exist. And it does. And so creating healthy, positive communities is a big part of it because the video game is also not done when you shut off the machine, right? Like, I used to play a lot of EverQuest back in the day. Dude, I actually have a 1999 server in my closet. So if you ever want to go, really? Yeah. Researching these things, but talking about them with my friends and that sort of thing was a big part of the experience. And I think that's even true for single player games. We've heard from a lot of you guys stories about games that have mattered to you. I think we just continue that conversation, but I think we also have to now be aware, as awkward and as difficult as it is, to try and excise some of the toxicity from our communities. I am very worried because the AAA industry, we talk all the time about, you can't do this because you're going to get review bombed. we have to make doing the positive things positive again. Yeah. But that was a great question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Make it good. Big pressure.
So I'm actually very jealous of everyone else who was able to formulate something. Like the whole talk was just great.
Thank you.
As a whole. So I just want to say thank you for coming all the way down to Georgia for this, because I'm very new to the development space.
Thank you for being here, and hopefully, like, you know, if you're down at GDC or if you've got an indie game in a couple of years, like, reach out, right?
Yeah.
I would love to see your games. I want to retire and play your games and have them be better than the games I made, so it's awesome.
Well, I hope I get there.
Thank you so much. You will. I believe. All right, thank you, everybody.